Hello students. Now we are going to study the conceptual topic, that is ecology, which is studied under biology. You know, there are various levels of biology that we study. So when we talk about a conceptual level where we get the concepts on a gross level, then we are referring to ecology basically. So the first thing that comes in mind is, what is ecology? You know, if you break this into two parts, it would be eco and logy. It is that branch of biology which deals with ecosystem. Now what comes in mind is that what is an ecosystem? Ecosystem is the basic unit of ecology that we study. So we need to know that what would be the basic unit of ecosystem. Then we will deal with what is an ecosystem, that how that basic unit comprises the ecosystem and how those units are interacting basically. Then there would be ecological levels of organization that we would discuss, and very important term, that is biological community, that would be discussed in this lecture. So first of all, you need to know that what is a unit, why do we need to have a unit, so that our study purpose is solved easily, so that we have a unit through which we are studying the basic term, that is the ecosystem. Ecosystem study comprises the ecology. Now what is an ecosystem? Ecosystem would have further compositions that we need to understand. So we have various levels, or we may say that various units that are part of an ecosystem. First one is an organism. So the question that is being put, that what is the basic unit of ecosystem? Don't get confused, I will come to what is an ecosystem, but before that we need to understand these terms, that the basic unit of an ecosystem is an organism. Alright, an organism, we see its physiological entity, we see its behavior, we see its interaction with the environment. So the basic unit happens to be the organism. When a few organisms which are studied together, it forms a population. Now when I talk about population, it is not just for the study purpose. In environment, we see interaction between various organisms, interbreeding organisms, that forms a species, and few species are going to comprise a population of the given area. Supposedly I am talking about a forest and I am considering example of elephants over there. So all the elephants, elephant would be an organism, you know that those elephants over there, all the species of elephants which would be there in the forest, they would be interacting with the environment and they would form the population of elephant at that given area. Now few populations, when they are interacting together with the environment, they form the biotic community. So you see, we are increasing in size when we are discussing these terms. This is an individual organism. This is group of organisms which are interbreeding. Few species would form the population, which is yet larger entity. Then we have few populations which could be of a plant, which could be of animals. They are interacting together. I am time and again using the term interacting. So with that I mean to say that they would be dealing with the environment, the habitat, and they would be dealing within themselves as well. So if I am talking about deer, supposedly, example, let's take the example of a deer. So deer would be an organism. It would have its species in the given area. The species of the deer would form the population. Those populations, that deer would be eating the grass or some plant. So that is interacting with another population, that is the population of grass or the plants. So that interaction would be studied under the term biotic community. When few biotic communities are interacting amongst themselves, then we have ecosystem. So here we come to the term that we basically have to deal with, that what is an ecosystem? So ecosystem is that arrangement where the biotic communities are interacting with the environment as well as among themselves. So biotic, you must be knowing what does biotic mean. Biotic, whenever I say, it means something which is living. And when I am talking about interactions, it is going to deal with certain components of the environment which would be abiotic. If I put word a behind any word, then it happens that it would be devoid of it. That means something non-living. So we get another term that is to be crammed over here, that biotic means living and abiotic means non-living. So in an ecosystem, the living communities of populations of organisms further, they are interacting with the abiotic components of the environment. Alright, now these interactions would be studied under ecosystem. So whenever we have to study ecology, which I took earlier, that ecology is that branch of biology which deals with the conceptual level where we study the ecosystems, we are basically dealing with the interactions of the communities which occur in a given area. Now the next question that comes in our mind is, what are the ecological levels of organizations? They are nothing else but these only. The simplest one, then it forms the population, then comes the community, then comes the ecosystem. When many ecosystems are interacting among themselves, then we have a higher level, higher ecological level, that is known as a landscape. This is not that important term, but you need to understand that when we say a landscape is there, that means there is a boundary where few given ecosystems, ecosystem 1 supposedly, ecosystem 2, ecosystem 3, just for example I am telling you, they would be interacting and there would be a clear-cut demarcation of that area that would make it a landscape. Supposedly you have a river over here. This topic is somewhat like geography, but you are considering biological aspects as well. This is separated by a river. So this is one landscape that we are talking about. Another part of river, to the other side of the river, you have few ecosystems which are again interacting amongst themselves. That would be landscape. Many landscapes when studied together would form a yet greater entity that would be a biome. Supposedly I talk about a desert that would have many landscapes inside it. Those landscapes would have many ecosystem interactions amongst themselves. That ecosystem would have biotic communities inside it interacting among themselves. So what basically ecology is, it is the interaction of organisms with the environment. Now what we are going to discuss next is that what is this environment term? We use it very oftenly in our day-to-day language that the environment was not good. So when we talk about environment, we are talking about habitat. When we study these terms under ecology, they are not as simple as we use them in our day-to-day conversations. This habitat basically refers to the physiological conditions, physical conditions, biological conditions, biochemical conditions. See, there are so many terms which are associated in which an organism, supposedly this happens to be an organism, all the conditions which would be prevalent in which it would be interacting with those conditions. Supposedly you are sitting in a room, if the temperature is high, so that would form the environment. That is going to affect the physiology of your body, that you would sweat or you would not feel comfortable. So that forms the habitat and it happens to be a part of environment. So environment is a larger term in which we have habitat, and habitat is not identified until and unless we take into consideration an organism that is interacting with this habitat. So habitat is not the simple term that we have been using till now, that it is the area around which organism stays. It is the interactive area in which the organism performs its basic functions of livelihood. Alright, so we have these terms. This is the most gross one. Then these biomes are further going to form the biosphere, which you might be aware that you must have drawn a water cycle diagram in which you have atmosphere, you have lithosphere, you have hydrosphere, and all those comprise a biosphere. So biosphere would have many biomes inside it. It is the largest term where it is the largest unit inside which we can study the ecological interactions. So we had few terms and you need to understand each term, but when we discuss all of these in detail, then you would get a better idea. Now I'm going to explain them in terms of examples. Supposedly we are talking about population of, we are talking about a lion over here. Organism would be lion. Imagine yourselves, you are in some African jungle where you have an organism that is a lion. A lion would have its own species, few lions which would be interbreeding, they would comprise a species. Now those species, there would be cat species, that lion would be there, panther would be there, tiger would be there, leopards would be there. So those would be the species of wild cats. All those species would form the cat population of that forest, basically the wild cats as we call them. Those populations would be interacting with the forest. If I am saying forest, that means other living organisms. They would be preying on some deer or cats or dogs, they would be eating something, that would be population of wildcats that is interacting with the environment, which would be living, as I told you in the example. Then those population of the prey, which happens to be the food of the cat, and the predator itself, which would be the wildcat, they would form the biotic community. These biotic communities would form the ecosystem of the forest. Now, if that forest happens to be separated by some mountain range or by some river from another landscape, which is a desert landscape, then that particular region of ecosystems would form the landscape. Many landscapes would form the biome, like supposedly I'm talking about there is a desert, there is a mountain range, then there is a forest. So that would form the terrestrial biome of that particular area, and the region that would comprise all the biomes would be the biosphere. So we get to know that what we are going to study when we talk about ecosystem, what would be there in the study ecology. So we have ecology, the study that deals with ecosystem. Basic unit happens to be an organism which is studied as population when we talk about interactions. Otherwise the unit basic one is the organism. Then we have what is an ecosystem. Ecosystem is that basic entity in which we study how the communities would interact. What was a biotic community? That is few populations that are interacting among themselves. When I talk about these things, I am exclusively considering the living organisms over here, because the basic one was living one only. So I am talking about biotic factors of that particular area. And the last one is, what are ecological levels of organization? These are the levels of organization where we can study that yes, there is this level of ecosystem that we are talking about, then the next level, and then the next level. So we have basically the entire study of these components that would constitute an ecosystem.